Okay, well, first of all, yes, Minister, I think there is a priority on the legislation that for the hierarchy of creditors in the case of liquidations, as Debenhams has demonstrated yet again. We saw this with Cleary's. Legislation indeed was put forward in the Dáil, and I think it's just not acceptable that this situation is repeating itself again with workers like the Debenhams workers, 2,000 workers, many of them working there for 2 and 3 decades, working loyally for this company and just dumped on the scrap heap. And it's worth saying that that company has used a series of shell companies essentially to siphon off its assets, so there's nothing left for the workers at the end. And all they have left is the leverage they have over the assets in the stores, which quite rightly, in my opinion, they're saying they're not going to let leave. It's just not acceptable that workers should be treated like that and at the bottom of the queue when it comes to a cynical liquidation, which was clearly pre-planned and orchestrated by Debenhams using the COVID crisis to execute that plan. And the evidence that it was pre-planned is that they set up these subsidiaries in order to siphon off the assets. And this is a company that continues to make profits through online trading and continues to operate in the UK and Ireland. So that's the first thing I just want to say that I really think you should do. I want to reiterate the call that was made by Breed Smith and others earlier on for the urgency in appealing the court decision on the second employment order. It is completely unacceptable that the Dáil votes in order to protect minimum standards of pay and conditions for workers, and then that is struck down with the possible undermining of conditions, often for very vulnerable workers, among hundreds of thousands of workers affected. On the issue of supports, as others from our group have already said, we are very much in favour of giving the lifeline to small enterprises who need the support. I want to reiterate the issue of the banks. The banks' treatment of many of these small businesses is unacceptable, particularly banks where we have a stake. We should tell those banks to lay off and give holidays on loans and so on, and similarly with insurance companies, as well as whatever support measures we are providing. But it is critically important that we weed out the companies who are taking advantage of this situation, or in some cases who are not taking up the schemes for other cynical reasons. I'll give you an example. Film producers who get a lot of money through the Section 481 tax relief, instead of taking up the wage subsidy scheme to keep their crew employed during the crisis, terminated all their employment. Now, I think it's incredible when government policy is to maintain the relationship between employer and worker, that film producers who are in receipt of public money make a cynical decision to sack everybody rather than to take up the wage subsidy scheme. But equally, companies that don't pay tax in this country or who are using the crisis as an excuse to cut pay, and I'll just finish on this, Catherlough. One company, for example, Newspread, who deliver independent newspapers, which were working throughout the crisis, and those workers were essential frontline workers, cut the pay of their employees by 5%. That shouldn't be allowed.
Thank you, Deputy Gormil Margaret.